What if the way to exceed the limits of human performance was hidden not in modern science, but in ancient rituals? Have you ever witnessed a traditional or herbal remedy that worked? This question turned into a dangerous reality when it was discovered that the fastest man on the planet owed his victory to a 2,000-year-old herbal concoction. On that summer evening, Paris was burning with a fever of anticipation. Above the massive bowl of the Stade de France, the sky was painted in hues of violet and orange by the last brushstrokes of the setting sun. But the eyes of the 80,000 people inside the stadium were not on the sky. They were on the tartan track, on the 8 men settled like statues into their starting blocks. This was the greatest gladiatorial arena of modern times, and on that evening, the king of the arena was there to defend his crown. The men's 100-meter final was about to begin, and the entire world was whispering a single name: Leo Vance. Leo was more than an athlete. He was an icon of the 21st century. He possessed a flawless physique, the charisma of a movie star, and most importantly, a clean image. In an era where doping scandals plagued sports like a pestilence, Leo Vance was a symbol of the triumph of science and hard work. His training was legendary. He worked with an army of biomechanics experts, nutritionists, and psychologists who optimized his every muscle fiber, his every breath. He was the living proof of how far human potential could go with a perfect fusion of technology and will. And he was unbeatable. The command, "On your marks," created a tense silence momentarily cutting through the stadium's roar. Leo settled into his block. He closed his eyes. The noise of the world around him faded into a hum and then disappeared entirely. In his mind, there was only the track, the finish line, and that perfect, flawless 10-second explosion. He was a machine, and now he was ready to run. When the pistol fired, 8 bodies launched from the blocks as one single organism. But even in the first 10 meters, it was clear that Leo was different. While the others ran with power, he flowed. His muscles exploded with a pure, fluid energy, like a drawn bow suddenly released. On his face, there was none of the usual expression of pain and effort. His eyes were half closed, and on his lips was an almost spiritual smile. It was as if his body was running on the track, while his mind was far away, in another place. After 50 meters, there was no longer a race. This was a demonstration. Leo separated from his rivals as if they were standing still. In the last 20 meters, he was alone. There was only himself, time, and the finish line. When he crossed that line, the stadium erupted like a volcano. But when Leo slowed to a stop, he did not raise his fists in the air or let out a victory cry. He just stood, his chest rising and falling gently, opened his eyes, and looked up at the sky, as if he were thanking something there, among the stars, that no one else could see. Then the numbers appeared on the scoreboard, and the noise in the stadium gave way to a stunned silence. 9.51. This was not just a new world record. This was the shattering of the human limit in a way that defied all known physical and biological models. This was not the time of a man, but the time of a god. On that night, Leo Vance was immortalized not just as a champion, but as a superhuman being. However, the peak of Mount Olympus is always slippery and treacherous, and sometimes even gods can fall. 24 hours after the victory, in the sterile, silent, and perpetually air-conditioned laboratory of the World Anti-Doping Agency in Lausanne, Switzerland, Dr. Elena Maris was staring at the results coming from the mass spectrometer screen in front of her. Elena was a woman in her mid-30s, ambitious and intelligent, with an unwavering faith in science and the absoluteness of rules. In her world, there were no gray areas. Something was either clean or it was not. And Leo Vance's A sample was not clean. But this was unlike anything Elena had ever seen in her career. On the screen, there were no chemical fingerprints of any known steroids, hormones, or synthetic drugs. Instead, there was the peak of a complex and strange organic compound that the computer could not identify. It did not look like something created in a chemist's lab. It looked more like an elixir, distilled from an unknown plant in the depths of a forest.
"This is impossible," whispered Elena's assistant. "The system has found a molecule it has never seen before." Elena was silent. Her heart was pounding with both professional excitement and an anxiety that heralded an approaching storm. This was either the most sophisticated, newest doping cheat in history, or it was something else. And in either case, the world of sports was about to be shaken by an earthquake like never before. When the scandal broke, its effect was no different from nuclear fallout. The news that Leo Vance's doping test was positive shocked the world. He was the golden boy of clean sports. His fall was not just the fall of an athlete, but of an ideal. The media competed to crucify him. Sponsors terminated their contracts one by one. He had gone from a hero to a pariah in an instant. When Leo Vance faced the cameras, he looked exhausted but defiant. He vehemently denied cheating. In tears, he said that the only thing he used was a special herbal tea given to him by his reclusive and eccentric coach, with whom he had worked for years. He explained that this tea calmed his mind and brought his body into harmony with the rhythm of nature. The world laughed bitterly at this explanation. Herbal tea was one of the most cliché, most pathetic excuses of doped athletes. Leo Vance was not just a cheat, he was a bad liar. But in her laboratory in Lausanne, Dr. Elena Mares was not so sure. The B sample had yielded the same result, an unidentifiable, complex organic compound. For weeks, she and her team tried to break down this mysterious molecule, to understand its structure. But the molecule seemed to constantly elude them. It contained traces of a few known plant alkaloids, but they were bonded together in a way that had never been seen before. And most importantly, they had no scientific models to explain how this compound could enhance performance. The case had turned into a nightmare for WADA. They had a positive test, but they did not know what it was positive for. How could they punish an athlete for a substance they did not know? It was a legal minefield. Elena was faced with the most difficult decision of her career. Either she would have to drop the case for lack of evidence and potentially let the biggest cheater in history get away with it, or she would risk WADA's scientific reputation by punishing an athlete for an unknown substance. In a last-ditch effort, she made a radical decision. She sent the three-dimensional image of the mysterious molecule's structure, under the heading Unidentified Organic Compound, to the most prestigious botanical and pharmacological institutes around the world. It was like sending a message in a bottle into the ocean. She was hoping that someone, somewhere, would recognize this impossible molecule. Weeks passed and no answer came. Elena had resigned herself to having to drop the case. And just then, an unexpected email arrived from an unexpected place. The sender was a semi-retired professor from the University of Oxford who worked on classical Greek and sports history. Someone's name was not widely known, Alastair Finch. The email was short, and it had an almost mocking tone. "Dear Dr. Morris, what you are looking for is not a new synthetic drug. It is a 2,000-year-old recipe. If you want proof, look at the 5th book of Pausanias's description of Greece, and then visit amphora number 489 in the Louvre Museum. Regards, Professor A. Finch." When Elena read the email, she thought it was a joke. Ancient Greek texts and a vase in a museum? This man must be out of his mind. But that night, at home, she succumbed to her curiosity. She found a digital copy of Pausanias's old text and started reading the 5th book. And there, in a section describing an Olympic game from the 4th century BC, she found these lines: "And the athlete Callias of Elis outran all his rivals in speed, but his victory was taken from him, for the judges discovered that he had chewed the sacred herbs that grow on the forbidden slopes of Mount Olympus, which give a man the fury and speed of the gods. His name was remembered in shame, with wild weeds instead of an olive branch."
Elena's heart began to beat faster. Could this be a coincidence? The next day, she took the first flight to Paris and found herself in the silent, magnificent corridors of the Louvre Museum. When she found amphora number 489, she held her breath. It was an ordinary ancient Greek vase, made in the red figure technique depicting running athletes. But Elena now knew what she was looking for. On the lower part of the vase, away from the main scene, there was a small, almost unnoticeable detail. An athlete without an olive wreath on his head, his face bowed in shame, was receiving a small bundle of herbs from a priest-like figure. Elena took out her phone and took a high-resolution photograph of that small detail on the vase. She sent the photograph to the botanical experts in her lab. "Can you identify the plants in this herb bundle?" she wrote. The answer came an hour later and turned Elena's entire scientific world upside down. The experts, by comparing the stylized drawings of the plants in the painting with the known ancient Greek flora, had identified 3 possible plants. And the known alkaloids of these 3 plants matched the basic building blocks of the mysterious compound found in Leo Vance's blood perfectly. Professor Finch was right. This was not a new trick. This was the oldest trick in history. Now Elena Morris and Professor Alistair Finch formed the strangest detective duo in history. One came from the sterile world of an ultra-modern laboratory, the other from the dusty libraries of Oxford. But now they were after the same mystery. Together they set out to solve the secret of this ancient recipe. Finch, following the clues in the ancient texts, theorized that this sacred rage concoction could only be made from plants that grew in a specific place, on a specific slope of Mount Olympus that was considered sacred and only accessible to priests in ancient times. This area is now the territory of a protected monastery closed to the outside world where monks have lived for thousands of years. After an incredible diplomatic effort, they obtained special permission from the Greek government and the Orthodox Church to enter that forbidden land. The monastery was a place where time had frozen. The old monks greeted them with silence and suspicion. But Professor Finch spoke to them not like a modern scientist, but like an ancient sage. He told them of Pausanias, of the story of Callias, and of a lost tradition. And finally, the oldest abbot of the monastery led them to the most secret part of the monastery, an old library with walls covered in faded frescoes, where the smell of dried herbs and incense hung in the air. And there he shared with them a secret that had been passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years. They had been protecting these plants and their recipes since before Christianity, to respect the power of nature. And yes, a few years ago, Leo Vance's coach had come to them to learn this secret. When they confronted the coach, the man denied nothing. He did not see himself as a cheater. He was an idealist. He believed that modern sports had lost its soul to sponsors, money, and synthetic science. He had wanted to revive the original spirit of sports, that divine connection between gods and men. By giving Leo this mixture, he was believing he was giving him not just speed, but also a sacred rage, that spiritual power that allows a person to transcend their own limits. The final hearing was more like a philosophy symposium than a courtroom. Leo Vance, Dr. Maris, and Professor Finch stood side by side presenting this incredible story and evidence to the International Court of Arbitration for Sport. The world watched, holding its breath. In the end, the decision was made. The rules were absolute. There was a banned, performance-enhancing substance in Leo Vance's blood. The fact that the substance was 2,000 years old did not change the rule. Leo lost his gold medal and was banned from the sport. But the narrative had completely changed. He was no longer a malicious cheater. He was the victim of a misguided idealism, a historical experiment, and his coach's obsession. The scandal sparked a global debate, not just on what doping was, but on the soul and history of sports. Professor Finch, once ridiculed by his colleagues, suddenly became a media darling, a hero of lost wisdom. And Dr. Ellen Maris had learned the biggest lesson of her career. Data and machines could show the truth, but to understand the why behind human action, one sometimes had to look into the depths of history, into the oldest stories of humanity. In the final scene, months later, Finch and Maris are standing in front of that ancient vase in the Louvre Museum. They are silently looking at the athlete painted in shame 2,000 years ago, Callias. They had the same ambition, the same pride, the same desire to touch the heavens. And in the end, they made the same mistake. I suppose that is the greatest tragedy of being human, Dr. Maris. Not that we fail to learn from history, but that we are forced to learn the same lesson over and over again, just in different costumes. Elena did not answer. She just continued to look at the painted figure on the 2,000-year-old ceramic. And in that moment, she felt the invisible, tragic bond between Callias and Leo Vance, with an understanding that transcended time. History is not just a series of events in the past. It is the timeless repetition of human nature. To listen to the 2,000-year-old echoes of ambition, glory, and failure, don't forget to subscribe to Parallel Storylines. See you in the next case file.